ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for the afternoon session. We're going to kick off with the afternoon keynote from Jeff Watkins. So Jeff, lifelong technologist, having started coding at the age of 6. I thought I was young when I started coding, but 6? Wow. Jeff has been in the industry for over 25 years, has a love of cybersecurity and AI, especially the human elements of both subjects. Working for a consultancy, he's seen the world change to be product and service oriented, and bangs the drum for ensuring that everybody is involved in delivering secure and usable offerings. Outside of work, he's co-host of the Compromising Positions podcast. I'm definitely checking that out after this. A unique view of cybersecurity from outsiders' perspectives. He's published in many places, and he's going to talk to us today about the Great Brain Robbery. So I'd like to hand over to Jeff.
Thank you very much. Can people hear this? Can you hear me okay? Good, good. Okay. I hope we're not all too sleepy after lunch. We'll put a timer on because I have the feeling that left to my own devices I'd run long. Always do. So let's just start with a little bit of a story. Imagine you've got a really urgent call from your CEO. You recognize their voice, their face, their mannerisms, everything. And they ask you to authorize a high-value transaction. Now, you've seen before, some of these things where you get fake emails and you go, no, this is the CEO asking for some money. So what you do is you make that transaction and millions of dollars later vanish a few minutes later after you make that transaction. And you were just part of a deepfake AI robbery, a scenario that cost one firm recently $25 million. Is in Hong Kong. And that's not the future, that's actually now. That happened, I think, in the middle of last year. So that means that we can no longer believe what we see or hear even, That means our whole grip on reality is in trouble, especially in the digital realm. So let's welcome to the Great Brain Robbery, from clickbait to conmen, navigating that future of online manipulation, which is a hell of a mouthful of a title. I probably should have stopped 2 sentences earlier. So before we go too far down the rabbit hole, I will introduce myself a little bit further. I'm Jeff Watkins, as so nicely introduced. I finished my MSc in cybersecurity in 2023, so I spent 24 years away from academia, just doing my MSc in AI now, after promising myself I'd never do another master's. And then I went, I'll just do another one then. And then I'm currently just about to start doing my final thesis, which will be loads of fun. I've been published in Wired, Forbes, and Raconteur. Just back from doing a talk in Web Dev Con in Amsterdam, which is one of the big dev conferences over there. You get a brand new talk today. Hope you enjoy it. So, as I mentioned, presenting to you today the Great Brain Robbery. And I think this is the greatest heist of all time, and I have stuff to back that up with. It's not just hyperbole. Obviously, the name of this talk is based on another great heist, as we know, as the Great Brain Robbery, which I believe was a sort of a Scotland-England collab. It was the robbery of 2.61 million in 1963, worth about nearly 70 million in today's money. It's a Royal Mail train travelling from Glasgow to London on the West Coast Main Line. After tampering with the line-side signals, a gang of 15 attacked the train with careful planning based on insider information. They don't know who that insider was, never identified them. They got away with their 2.61 million, and the bulk of that was never recovered. So they're using but the thing is, this is 1963, and obviously in the real world on a train, they use a combination of techniques that are not too far away from the digital heists, how people operate to get what they want. Now, history lesson aside, I could bang on about things like cybersecurity policies, how we govern AI, and a whole bunch of stuff. And of course, there's a general lack of governance globally, apart from the EU AI Act. But I'd like to be a little bit more personal and talk about how it affects us here, especially here, up here in the brain. We have one mind, and we don't want to waste it or have it poisoned by things that just aren't true. So what happened in the opening story there with the company's called Arup, they lost $25 million, and it was a heist. And that goes through some key stages. Firstly, they get organized, and I'll show you some figures, but organised online crime is incredibly huge. Secondly, they found a target, not just a company, but they found an individual. Then they employed the tools of the trade. The attack used psychological tricks, urgency, authority, stuff that makes you bypass your common sense if you're not too careful. Then they brought in some heavy machinery, using AI to superpower that attack to make it more believable. And then they cracked the vaults of reality, and then that's it. They got away with it, and they made the heist. So when I say organised online crime, how big of a problem is it? I mean, we can't really see cybercriminals like we could see people running from a bank raid. In fact, the catch and conviction rate of cybercrime is incredibly low, especially with the types of criminality we're talking about here. Now, if you look in the UK, 42% of all cybercrime convictions are police people in the police, because they're looking at stuff they shouldn't be looking at. So it's a different type of cybercrime. But actually, the overall catch rate for cybercrime is between 0.1 and 0.05%. It's vanishingly low. So it's really hard to pin down individuals. You won't see them running away usually. And it's a bit late by that point. We can talk about the scale. So this is the overall cost of cybercrime for 2024. Don't know if people can see the numbers very well there, but that says 10.5 trillion, that's in dollars. That's more than the net worth combined of all of the world's tech billionaires. I do like that Bill Gates looks really sad there, like he's lost at being a billionaire, and the rest of them look like maybe they're constipated. So cybercrime has become the greatest transfer of wealth in human history, and it is predicted to get much, much larger. Currently, if we treat it as an economy, it would be the third largest one behind the US and China. Some sources reckon we could get to 30 trillion within a few years, which is very scary because that would make it the greatest economy if it was an economy. This means that hacking humans is actually a really lucrative business. So while the cybersecurity industry tries to stay one step ahead of cybercriminals with advanced technical solutions, things like that, it often overlooks like the human element. And it's time to change that by thinking about how we can protect ourselves and others around us. So now for every crime, there's a criminal, and there's usually a victim, unless you're committing like some kind of victimless crime, like putting pineapple on your pizza. Although in each country, there'll be criminals committing cybercrimes, probably to other people in that country. For the most part, cybercrime kind of crosses borders. So first of its kind report was published the other year in a journal called PLOS ONE, and it showed a relatively small number of countries actually house the most cybercrime. So, having a guess, let's have a look how far behind time I am. Oh dear God. Right, okay. Guess who's number one when it comes to cybercrime in the world? I want a little bit of audience participation. Louder. I can hear you saying it louder. Much louder? Thank you. Russia. Any guesses on who's next?
Iran.
Good choice, but no, it's Ukraine next. Next one is China. Kind of predictable. I'll talk about why in a minute. Then the USA. That one surprised me. Then Nigeria. I'm sure people have seen the Nigerian prince scams. Romania. North Korea. Guess who's number 8? You're right. However, though, if you look at the proportions, compared to Russia, it's proportionally quite low. There's also different demographics for each type of cybercrime because, there's common garden ransomware for profit. A lot of that comes from things like Russia and Nigeria. There's disruption of critical national infrastructure, basically stuff that's trying to destabilize our infrastructure. And that mostly comes from things like Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And then there's kind of state secrets and intellectual property theft, and that's mostly from China. So, but we don't have to worry too much about the attribution of these attacks, really, because actually by the time the damage has been done, it doesn't matter. So now we understand kind of the scale of the situation. Let's find out a bit why it's a problem for us, the humans, rather than technology. Now, if you'd asked about the biggest cyber attack surface a few years ago, many people would have probably mentioned something technical like firewalls, web servers, and things like that. But times are changing, and as threat detection itself starts to use things like AI, more protective software, it's all continuously improving, and operating systems in general have become much more secure themselves. So that means the kind of digital lockpicking of old, where you've seen the hacker movies from the 90s, that's becoming much more difficult now. But one thing that hasn't got any harder to pick is us. Which is weird because I'm sure we've all done a cybersecurity awareness program here. Hands up if you have. Good. Yeah, you'd imagine so. We've all seen security policies. I'm sure we've all clicked on the terms and conditions, things like that. I mean, you could argue that some of these cybercrimes are targeting people who aren't IT professionals. But that shows that people in IT, and even those, and sometimes especially those in cybersecurity, are just as vulnerable. And this is shown by the fact that the proportion of cyber attacks against humans is growing. It was about 70% pre-pandemic. It's now about 80% of all cybercrime and attacks are against the human being. So the element there against the technology is starting to shrink. The great starting point is understanding why cybercrime is such a problem for us squishy human beings is how intangible all our digital valuables are. I mean, you wouldn't walk out the house without locking your door, probably. Depends on where you live, not where I live. There are certain things when you can see the security, you can see the threat, actually you're pretty good at it. But when it comes to kind of these noughts and ones, it's floating around in the cloud, it's really kind of quite abstract. This is a feature of us that makes us really good targets. Who here is on social media? Any social media at all? If you're on LinkedIn, that counts as well. Yeah, most people. Of course, bad news is most of these can be used for things like OSINT. People know what OSINT is. It's open source intelligence. Alongside things like dark web sources and other types of breaches and the like. And of course, less tech-savvy people don't even realize the kinds of data they're giving up on a daily basis. And of course, one of the other big problems is cognitive overload in this hyper-connected world. The average person makes around 35,000 decisions per day, according to cognitive sciences. And then we layer on top of that all the constant pings, alerts, information streams, doom scrolling, loads of decision fatigue. And it's a mental state where we're so in decision fatigue that we start to skip things and trust shortcuts and start to just make leaps without really thinking about them too much because we get comfortable or we're stressed, which is great news for attackers because we're not wired for 24/7 vigilance against attackers, and they know that. And they wait for the moment where we'll click before we think. Up until 30 years ago, we didn't even have anything beyond the kind of TV shows and mass media and like 4 TV channels. We haven't evolved actually psychologically or societally quickly enough to actually keep up with the web, especially not things like artificial intelligence. Another thing is that we're always online as well, meaning that means we're always vulnerable. Our digital footprints are massive with the social media, phones, smartwatches, work laptops, home assistants, everything. And that means this attack surface sprawl means attackers don't have to hack a firewall, they can just text us. Personal devices are now one of the greatest gateways into corporate networks, because thanks to BYOD, WhatsApp for business and stuff like that. And it means there's a huge amount of OSINT available on people. That blurring of personal and professional boundaries that came with lockdown as well. You know, people sharing too much in the background, too much in their bedroom. But then also like quite a lot of people sharing on LinkedIn, like first day at work with like ID badges and things like that. There's a lot of stuff going on that this blurring between the social, the personal life and the work life is starting to happen. We're also creatures of habit, repetition and routine. That means there's exploitable patterns and kind of predictable habits that make it really easy to socially engineer. Most of us check emails first thing in the morning. If you're going through a load of emails, maybe it's a good time for an urgent phishing mail. We reuse passwords and most of our recovery questions as well. Thankfully, they're going the way of the dodo. Routines give attackers a rhythm to set their traps to. We're creatures of habit. Cybercriminals are creatures of observation. Sadly, despite all the breaches that happen, increasingly, there's kind of a low awareness of the threat landscape, I think. Most people still associate cybercriminals with hackers in hoodies, not LinkedIn messages or voicemails. Employees may not know what a deepfake voice or QR phishing code scam looks like. Security training often feels like compliance theatre. You do the training, you probably just fast forward through the video, put it on 2-speed, and then you just you're allowed to retake the exam as much as you want, so you just click the buttons until you get the right combination, and then you go about your day. No behavioural change happens. And fundamentally, most people still see cybersecurity as somebody else's problem. It's something abstract, it's scary, but actually somebody else is dealing with it. It won't happen to me, nobody's interested in me, which may work for a bit until it fails. And even if people are aware, being constantly vigilant with the constant pings and warning can actually desensitize us. This is one of the modern sort of security fatigue phenomenon we're seeing. We start to ignore security pop-ups or warnings because you had it 5 times before. Oh, well, it's just a false positive. I'll get rid of that. It's like, uh-oh, you've just let somebody in. And people just don't think they're important enough to be targeted. And we also then often discourage people from reporting problems, especially in the work, by stigmatizing them. We call them idiots, stupid, dumb, the weakest link. And we're just as harsh to our peers when we get a suspected breach. And people are losing their jobs over incidents like this, and kind of people bullying them after the fact, especially in the media, and it's kind of kicking them when they're down. And I don't know what happens to the person, the financial director in the opening Arab story. I don't know what happened to them, because I did look and I couldn't find it. And I hope they kept their job, but I'm sure they had a really bad month. So despite our security awareness campaigns, we just keep falling for things. I think there's a few reasons for this. One of the things to wrap our head around is awareness is not equal to behavioral change. We're odd animals. We can be made very aware of things. That always doesn't necessarily lead to a behavioral change. In fact, it often doesn't, unless there's a really good incentive to do so. A lot of people know that smoking, drinking, eating ultra-processed foods, or like using MySQL are really bad for your health. But people do it anyway, because habits are incredibly hard to break. It requires time, dedication, willpower, and like the will to change, to change these deeply ingrained habits. We often need a really compelling reason or incentive to make that shift, and quite often some kind of support system around it as well. Not just do this, now change your habits. It needs to be a proper support system where you actually feel rewarded by changing. Without these elements, even the best intentions can fall flat. So we're fallible because we're predictable, difficult to persuade when it comes to good practices, but there's some things that kind of aren't our fault, and that's the deceptions, the thing that catch somebody in a hurry, the less savvy user, or even a seasoned cybersecurity professional. So we're going to talk about some of the psychological tricks, kind of the why we're the biggest attack surface there is on the planet, because you can't easily program software to avoid these kinds of attack. This is where I start to panic. Oh my God. Right. So when it comes to attacks on people, the two main things are happening. First, we covered the awareness and behavior one, but also the second is something called an amygdala hijack. But what is the amygdala? It's the squishy part of the brain that handles our emotional regulation, which is very unhelpful for us, but helpful for attackers. It happens when an attacker uses an emotional response against you by creating some kind of sense of urgency or fear that can shut down your higher reasoning. And that happens through basically making your heart rate go up, making your breathing get disorganized. Your amygdala shuts off, and then I'm sure we've all been there and done that, where maybe you've been under some pressure, you need to answer something really urgently, and suddenly your brain stops working and just nonsense comes out your mouth. That's the same thing happening. That's an amygdala, some kind of amygdala hijack, where your reasoning is switched off, the brain is basically gone to bed. So the antidote to this is quite simple yet hard at the same time. It's to recognize when it's happening and take a step back. After learning a few of these tricks, hopefully we can understand how some of these attacks work, and I'll go over a few now. Probably the most common one is urgency fear. So that's how does that work? Well, basically, as we just said, it's an amygdala hijack. And good examples are things like your account is being suspended, or somebody has hacked your account. Please click here to restore access. You go, oh my God, I better put the password in. this works so well so many times on people. You'd be surprised when we do phishing tests. There's always one or two people who fall for it. So this is probably the most common kind of attack. The next one, I think probably the next most common, is authority, and it's very similar, but it's basically saying, well, as in the opening story, CEO, you have to make this transaction, and it has to be soon, so they put a little bit of the urgency in there as well, because we are conditioned from a very early age in this culture to comply with authority figures, which is great for sort of maintaining order, but very bad when we're under attack. So real-world examples of things like business email compromising or Beck attacks that spook the CEO. Here's an example. We get loads of these all the time. Thankfully, nobody falls for it because we're very hot on this one. I'm in a meeting. Please here's my new number. Can you make a transaction for me? This is really common and catches a lot of people out. Another one is reciprocity. And it's the idea like if you are offered something, then you give something in return. And that means giving up data usually or something worse. So, here's a free PDF report. Please give me your login details to access the site or something like that. Now, I couldn't find a really good naughty example for this. But here is an example of reciprocity. Like, have this kind of exclusive bonus, but yeah, you kind of got to sign up to our mailing list first. People do that with cyber crimes as well. But quite often it's malicious downloads, gated content that's actually on poison sites and things like that. Next one, this is similar to fear and urgency, is scarcity or the fear of missing out. And we've seen these ones before, I'm sure, online. Things like there's only 10 spots left on this crypto investment and things like that. And it works in a similar way because scarcity triggers like irrational decision making. You go, I don't want to miss out because it'll never be available again. So here we go, like here's an offer to get some kind of bursary or something, and we go, better sign up for that. Obviously, an attack. Next one is social proof. This plays on like the conformist nature. Join other people using this thing, or your friend shared this document with you, and it works because as a shortcut, if maybe some of my colleagues or friends are using something already, I'll go, I don't need to do my due diligence on this. I can just use it because it's clearly safe they're using it. This is a real problem on things like Facebook for years. I'm sure we've seen some of this where you get a poison, somebody gets hacked and they start sending poison links. But also the popular social quizzes, sure, I'd love to give you all this information for free. I'm sure we've seen these, your superhero name is the name of your first pet and your mother's maiden name or something like that. This is, these are just basically security questions you're answering for some of these things. And final one in this section is curiosity, which is like they say, killed the cat. And it'll be something tasty like, check out this leaked video, or here's a confidential document that you've been mentioning. Like, this is salacious and tempting. And people are awful for this. So like this kind of thing, this is a real example. It works because people love knowing a cheeky secret, or they want to get access to something they maybe shouldn't do. And maybe people not in the know about cybersecurity go, this is fine. But and also this includes things like clickbaity titles, but also things like USB drop attacks. You find a USB in the car park and it's got secret files written on it, and you go, I'll better plug that into my PC. And I'm sure you've found in the past, if you've seen some of these in the wild, there's a big combination of all of these factors being used. It's very rarely just one. It's a combination of these factors being used to actually get a really strong response from you. So far, so good. We've got criminals to target, the tools, the trade, but it's going to be a big job to do at scale, so we bring some heavy machinery in. And AI is the kind of heavy machinery that crooks need. The advent of the generative AI world democratized access to AI services, and it's changed the world, mostly for the positive. But whatever we have access to, cybercriminals also have access to, and you can bet your bottom dollar they're using it. When generative AI became first publicly available, there was a rapid spike in phishing attacks. McKinsey said about 138%. Some figures go as high as 800%. And various ones between. It's difficult to know sometimes. It's serious, it really is, because any major advancement in technology will almost always be first leveraged by criminals. Because they don't have to worry about policies, principles, getting IT sign-off, getting budget, they don't have a project to deliver. They have a mission to complete, and how they do it is limited by a process. They know they have almost zero chance of repercussions. It was just a bit more expensive before. Now it's cheaper because the democratization of AI makes it really easy for them. And it's a dangerous time as generative AI services allowing for mass production of content, things like automated phishing email generation. This kind of bulk content we've never seen before. Unique, tailored, and sophisticated. Before it was really crude. I'm sure we've had old-fashioned phishing emails that were pretty shocking. They're like, this is obviously a phishing email. Not anymore. The game has changed. And at a price point that was never possible before. You're going from needing loads of expensive equipment to just basically having a human on a laptop or maybe a SaaS platform. But LLMs are also making people sound much more credible. Tools like ChatGPT can write convincing emails in no time at all. Multiple languages, perfect grammar. These get around existing sniff tests through automated filters as well, which is a real problem because they're much more credible, they're much more diverse than the patterns that the old-fashioned email filters were designed to use. Add to that, attackers have started using A/B testing on messages to figure out which ones work better on victims, which is amazing to hear. So you have cybercriminals using like product management techniques, analytics, AI. They're a really sophisticated bunch, and I'm sure you'd love to hire some of them if they weren't crooks. And AI is enabling personalization like nothing else before. People are having relationships and online weddings with replica personas. And similar kinds of services could be used for much more nefarious purposes. Even when we build up a connection, we expose ourselves too much online. We overshare and become vulnerable. But even simpler, personalized phishing content can seem much more credible as it looks like it's not mass mailed. It looks like it's addressed to you. It might mention like, how was your holiday last week and things like that. It's much more like, this is somebody who knows me. And AI-driven OSINT tools are getting momentum. So I mean, it won't be long before huge hyper-personalised campaigns of attacks are launched against people, hitting them on every single front, fully automated, incredibly believable. And Gen AI also makes things like sentiment and tone analysis much simpler to implement, although these services did already exist. They can detect emotional states in conversations and transactions and start to turn up or turn down the pressure or change the subject to try and get their way around sounding like it's a pressure tactic. And it's also generative AI, if you ever have a go with this, it's really fun. It's much better at applying psychological tricks than we are. If you give it a rule book of all the psychological tricks, it's really good at it, scary good at it. So you think about it, you enable like massive hyper-personalization with all these psychological tricks, OSINT scanning, target profiling at a huge scale, and this personalization, you've got an absolute disaster on our hands. Gen AI is almost the perfect toolkit for scammer. Even though many of us are running large language models locally, so there's no restrictions on what kind of content can be produced. You can maybe ChatGPT, even ChatGPT, if you ask it nicely the right way, it'll generate your phishing mails. So there are actually multiple types of dark web services that exist for this. For a small subscription fee, there's Worm GPT, Fraud GPT. I think recently in the news today was somebody who was jailed in England for running like a phishing scam generating site. But yeah, with things like Llama and DeepSeek, you can just run all this locally now. You don't have to go onto the dark web and give any Bitcoin away. So I mentioned that AI can supercharge these kinds of attacks. Now let's go over some of the attacks that go beyond regular psychological cons and direct into warping of reality. And this is where I think it gets really scary. And this section, I'll be focusing more on misinformation than direct cybercrime, because I think that a few of the examples I've got here are kind of illustrative. But these techniques can and are being used by cybercriminals for cybercrime. For those who are unfamiliar, there's misinformation, where something untrue is spread by one or more people, not necessarily intentionally. They might not know they're spreading a lie. There's disinformation, where something untrue is spread, but they know they're spreading a lie, and they're done with the purpose to actually deceive. And then there's malinformation, where there's seeds of truth, but they're kind of presented in a way to cause harm or usually particular political reasons. Donald Trump did it against Kamala Harris, saying that she failed a bar exam. Fine, but you didn't mention that most people fail the bar exam on the first try. On the second try, she got it. So malinformation. And credit where credit's due. This section of this book was inspired by Collapsing Trust by Dr. Sheila Martin. She's a professor in MIT at Political Sciences. Well worth a read if you can get a copy. So unfortunately, we're really susceptible to fakery outside of text. We're used to not being able to trust everything we read. And reading does or should engage higher reasoning in our brain. Once upon a time, you could believe your eyes and your ears. According to IBM's X-Force report 2022, hybrid phishing, that's voicemail phishing, 3 times more likely to succeed than just a regular phishing email alone. Because video and audio campaigns were really expensive to produce up until now. But generative AI is made, not beyond text, into video, into audio. It's made things much easier. So, we're used to being able to believe our eyes and our ears. But generative AI has really changed the game so quickly. I mean, you look at this. This is the kind of image I remember from maybe 3 or 4 years ago, from the first version of DALL-E. I was blown away at the time. This is the first time synthetic computer imagery that looked like something real had been generated, I'd seen. And now we have things like incredible AI image and video generation. I'm sure of all things like the OpenAI Sora demos and stuff like that. Technology is moving much quicker than we can adapt to it. So both as humans and technologically, yeah? But there's a number of services that claim to be able to spot deepfakes and things like that. But this field is moving so quickly, when people put the latest deepfakes through this technology, unfortunately, it doesn't work. This kind of fakery isn't new. What do Instagram influencers and Joseph Stalin have in common? First blush, very little. But actually, if you look at a bit small on this screen, if you look at the impeccably smooth complexion of Joseph Stalin there, raises the question, was Stalin the OG of Photoshop? Apparently, retouchers in Soviet Russia spent many long hours smoothing out the blemishes of his imperfect complexion because he had smallpox when he was younger. Now, but one of the other things was that actually they started to airbrush the people out of the image as well. So as people fell out of fashion, they just kind of got airbrushed out and out. And there's loads of other examples of this in Stalin's reign. So this is kind of, I guess, maybe some of the earliest examples of deepfaking. The earliest example of disinformation was actually in the Roman times, where there was a coin minted impugning Mark Antony and Cleopatra. That's the first evidence we have of it. So how is AI influencing these issues? Well, until recently, most of us thought AI was for solving specific problems, thinking, analysis. Now you can create content at a scale in multimedia. It doesn't care or know about the harms that could pose. Most of these players are putting controls around it, but as we move to local implementations of the dark web, there's nothing we can do. Now it's difficult to find figures around misinformation and its spread, but we can also think things about what we can measure and actually look at things like, as we discussed before, the phishing attacks. And as you said in the earlier slides, that went up by more than 400% potentially, with an overall sustained increase of around 140, maybe much higher. And despite Gen AI being relatively new, it seems like a lot of social media misinformation has been automated for some time. Prior to generative AI, bots kind of had a problem. They were easy to rumble. They were predictable. They didn't coherently reply or debate. In fact, somebody noticed when the Russia and Ukraine situation kicked off, all of the bots overnight on Twitter switched from talking about COVID misinformation to Ukraine misinformation. So clearly, Russia was running those bots. But the thing is, with AI introduced into the loop now, it's getting harder to detect. This has led to a load of scaremongering. People saying, people are using it en masse and things. It's claiming this is some example, but these are all. Unfortunately, the talks of how much misinformation is online currently also is a source of misinformation, which is recursively ironic. But it is a global concern, and the World Economic Forum thinks it's one of the top risks. Misinformation, disinformation, and also the effects of things like AI technologies might be a little bit small on the screen, but the World Economic Forum has got a really big concern about what we're doing. And basically, the environment is the only thing that's ahead of things like Gen AI and misinformation and disinformation when it comes to threats. Going to be over time. So it's also affecting things like politics now, and this is actually becoming genuine cybercrime because it's actually classed as cyber warfare. Things like there's a synthetic Biden urging people in New Hampshire not to vote in an upcoming primary election. There's this AI image of the Pentagon. This actually sent the stock market into collapse for a few hours. So these things, although you misinformation, think, well, what is this to do with cybercrime? actually, these are being used to influence people, to make them do other things that they wouldn't usually do. Because when we talk about this kind of thing, then we think about, well, what about deepfakes that do affect us? Here's a video of Elon Musk, except it's not Elon Musk. It's a bona fide scam. I saw this one on YouTube. I don't know if the audio will play or not. Oh, it does.
How will help people get rich right now? Today we are launching an investment project that is working right now. If you see this video, absolutely everyone can earn it. Everything is very simple. If you invest your money in Bitcoin for Tesla Tree Bot, is our bot map in which everyone who invests in cryptocurrency will be able to receive exactly 30% of it every day. How long will it take for dividends to arrive? I'm sure that from 3 months. The number of seats on the...
Now, I think if you look and listen closely, that's pretty easy to spot. However, that deepfake is about 3 years old. And I saw a much more recent Martin Lewis one that was much better. And these experimental deepfakes I've been seeing this year have been astounding. And I don't think we really know how to deal with this. One article I read recently said, how do we stop AI from creating deepfakes? Well, the answer is we can't. As somebody mentioned earlier, the cat's out the bag. You can't put maths back into a bottle. You can't put the techniques of machine learning and deep learning back into the bottle. It's more pressing than ever that we have mission critical security that ensures that a person is the right person, a real person interacting in real time. That tooling won't be free and it'll be fallible, but we will need it. And aside from the scams, we're actually seeing things like job interviews now. So this is a recording somebody made while interviewing somebody.
Are you using something to change your camera view? Can you take your hand and put it in front of your face, cover it partially? It's not good because I can see that you're using some kind of software.
So, people are now using, so that the governments across the world are now finding they've accidentally hired people from North Korea who are stealing state secrets. Or some people are just using it to get more money. They're using it to be overemployed, effectively to get multiple jobs and just rinse people. You get your probationary period, remote, and you just sit there for 3 months. You get your salary, you get fired, but you just keep doing it. So this is becoming a real problem with recruitment as well. Apparently, they've now developed face filters that when you do this, it won't disrupt the face filter. That's why they're asking to do that. It disrupts the face filters. But unfortunately, most modern deepfake detection doesn't do a good job of detecting all this stuff. The criminals are always one step ahead. So when I mentioned earlier on, I talked about Dr. Sheila Martin. Neither she nor the book exist. The photograph is entirely synthetic. You can't even reverse image search that. It was created on thispersondoesn'texist.com, which will generate a near infinite stream of realistic but entirely synthetic photographs of people. That's just one use case in 30 seconds. So I hope you scared you to the point where you'll put on a tinfoil hat before bed tonight. So I've shown you some of the shape of the con. I've showed you how and why we're under attack, how generative AI is causing a perfect storm. So I'm drawing to a close. I'm sure most of you will be thankful for that. So I'll leave you some key takeaway points on how to secure our own vaults. Remember how these attacks happen? They're highly organized. They're targeted, quite often further targeted at humans. They use psychological tricks and tools of the trade. They use AI-heavy machinery. And finally, they warp reality to make you take action. So remember, this happened to everybody at every level, across the globe. Even financial services professionals and cybersecurity experts it's happening to. This internal memo, seen by CNN, Michael Kwok said, "Well, we don't want another $225 million scam on the hands, do they?" He's very worried about it. So, how do we stop the greatest heist of them all? Probably the greatest heist that ever will be in human history. We have to stop it, but the technology is moving faster than we can adapt it to it. So, first of all, awareness and behavioural change. So this means actually building better security culture, and not just awareness, actually security culture and practices. Realising the psychological levers such as urgency, curiosity, and authority, those kind of things. Proactive vigilance, and consistently more responsible digital behavior. Educating yourself and others about social engineering tactics, things like that, disciplined approach when interacting with digital communications, and establish clear and practical guidelines and regular training that's backed up with actual practice and reward behaviors to reinforce these secure behaviors. And also build up the layer of skepticism and resilience, especially in the age of AI. Things like media training will be so important now. You know, actually building up critical thinking skills as AI is becoming more plausible. And teach people to slow down. Build more resilience through just being a bit slow with your tech. Assessing context carefully. Seeking initial verification where needed. Trust sources when faced with, find trusted sources when faced with something suspicious. And finally, we should all be working towards building defensive technologies and cross-sector collaboration. We need a collective shield on this. We can't stop AI. We can't stop the research on AI. We need to, as friendly nations, work together on building technologies that will actually help us and collaborate with things like awareness and also making sure that all of the exploits are being disseminated. So shared intelligence, collaborative response plans, collective advocacy, things like that, these will all help us build a collective shield. And thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jeff. As you said, ran over a little bit, so we're a little bit squeezed, but an important topic, so it's worth the extra few minutes. Do you reckon?
Thank you. I'll take that.
Just got time for a couple of questions. Anybody got a question in the room? Yes, I'll do this one.
Thank you. My question is, thank you for the presentation, first of all. It was brilliant. There is a high emphasis on awareness and behaviors, but are there any barriers that we can put in place that are more systemic and intrinsic to the technology that we use?
I can't hear you very well.
Oh, sorry.
The mic's not working.
Okay.
Oh, it's not. Oh, I can't hear it. Go on. So,
No, it's fine. My question is, so there's a lot of emphasis on awareness and behaviors pattern for the potential victims. But other steps that we can take systemic-wise, because not to rely so much on changing human nature per se.
Ideally, yes. Ideally, as the defensive systems are getting better, we are getting better at spotting AI-based attacks. So that's, I think, the biggest emerging threat. But the problem is the attackers are always like one step of technology ahead. So I think we'll probably need greater global collaboration in the research and development of it, because currently it's in pockets. I don't think it's really good enough. And the platforms are not owning this. X is just like we'll just do community notes. The people are not really owning, the people on the very large online platforms or VLOPs, they're not owning that being the solution to this. So we'll need, ideally there would be systemic things. And some of that also is them pushing better media literacy and things like that into schools as well.
So talking about scepticism, that very first graph where we've seen the
Yes.
estimated cost of 10.5 trillion.
Yes.
That's 1/3 of GDP of the United States.
Yes.
So I thought, I'll dig into that a little bit. I could only find on research organisations, cybersecurity vectors, who have been cited multiple times. But the actual data to back that up is opaque. We've not cited their sources or anything that almost makes me suspicious of that.
That's a very good point.
I'm just wondering, would you say that seems a little bit on the high side? 10.5 trillion?
I'm not so sure it is, because this is global. And it's not just and the thing is though, you have to take that in context of that's not necessarily the money they've stolen. That's the cost of cybercrime. So that means that, like example, the British Library being down for several months, they lost no real money, as in nobody stole any money from them. But they were offline for 3 months or something, or some extended period of time. So the costs of cybercrime are 10.5 trillion, I believe. But yes, that is the quoted study, and that's unfortunately the best source that we've got. I know it's very hard. So like the other thing about the sources of cybercrime, where I showed the top, there's only one study on that as well. The problem is with it's underreported. So if you're a victim and you pay a ransom, most people are not going to admit to paying a ransom. In fact, we're looking at in the UK now for the public sector actually outlawing paying ransomware. So it's really underreported. And that makes it really difficult to actually get hard figures on, unfortunately. And of course, also when it comes to people using things like VPNs and stuff like that, it makes it really hard to figure out who is actually the originator of a cybercrime as well. So it's a bit of a dark art. But I think the only thing I can say, like with absolute certainty, is it is going up.
Okay, folks. In the interest of staying on time, I'd just like to invite you to show your appreciation once more to Jeff. Thanks very much, Jeff. And we have about 5 minutes turnaround time to get to the next breakout. Thanks very much.